Well, yeah, I was just saying it's exciting to have the chance to sit down with you. I'm not so much from the ultra running world. I'm more like my origins was track and field. I ventured into some of the road, but it seems that maybe over the last 10 years I've become a lot more fascinated with it. In fact, recently I've been following a lot of Dave Roche's
Mhm.
running. I don't know if you've seen any of his YouTube videos,
I
but
haven't really seen his videos, but I know Dave, and so over the years, he and I have been on plenty of podcasts together as well.
yeah, it was he sort of sucker punched me. A friend of mine was following some of his stuff, and for months he was like, "You got to go check out Dave Roche and hear about his training philosophy." And I was like, "Okay, mate, no worries." And then I don't know what happened, but he must have popped up on my YouTube, and I started going down that rabbit hole. And honestly, I think it was probably 6 months ago that I got the shock when I realized just the vast approaches that ultra runners take to preparing for whatever race it might be that they're training for. And I thought that could be a nice place to kickstart from, because there definitely doesn't seem to be a one size fits all approach to preparing for an ultra marathon. And I don't know, maybe a way to kickstart that conversation would be to hear a little around your philosophy on running versus cross training versus volume and intensity, because I find that so fascinating how it works so differently for such different athletes.
Well, that's the thing. Ultra running is a lot of different things. If you think of most sports, it's almost the same in every way. Like a game of football, soccer on grass in one place or another place. Maybe the temperature is different, but it's the same thing. Basketball, you could have a slight bit of variation. Maybe you've got an outdoor concrete court versus a wooden one indoors, but it's very little difference. With running, particularly ultra running, you could be in a desert, you could be in a jungle, you could be doing 200 miles in one go, you could be doing transcontinental 50 miles a day for 2 months or something. So it's kind of a little bit of everything. That's one of the most fun things, is that you can be a road runner and a track runner and a trail runner and a mountain runner and a hot runner and a cold runner. And all these things are the same sport. And it's kind of fun to do a little bit of everything. So one person I've always admired for this when I first got into this, and this was 20 odd years ago, was Mike Wardian. So I don't know if you know much about him, but he does every type of racing. So he was an Olympic trials marathoner. He does ultras. He does 100 milers. He'll drop in a 5K. He did a 5K, I think, this last couple of days. He did the Boston 5K, and he's quick. I mean, Olympic trials on the road, as well as all these other things. He'll do obstacle courses. He'll do every type of race, really, whether it is purely running or adjacent to running. And that's one of the kind of fun things, that it's such a universal skill that you get. And particularly if you're more of a trail runner, that's even more transferable, because there's many more elements to that. If you're on a road, you're not really necessarily dealing much with hills. The shoes you wear can be fairly universal for one road versus another road. While on the trail, you've got mud, and then you've got technical rock. You've got it when it's wet, when it's dry. All these different things. I mean, the gear's much more varied, and the type of training is going to be more varied, but the core principles are going to be the same. So whether you're looking at a marathon training guide or someone who's training professional marathoners versus someone who's training back of the pack or front of the pack in ultras, there's still the same kind of fitness that you need, but there's just so much more specific stuff you have to do in ultras. So you've got to prepare yourself for hot weather running for a Western States or a Badwater. You've got to prepare yourself for altitude if you're going to go to Leadville or Hard Rock. So all these elements that you've got to add onto it. And so it's a core set of principles. So a lot of people come from maybe shorter stuff, maybe roads, and then they move into the trails. And that's a great foundation. But then there's all these new things that they have to learn about. And volume is one of those. And I think particularly road runners are maybe more focused on mileage, while trail runners are more focused on time. Because if you're going up and down mountains, it's a lot slower and you might not cover that much distance, but you could be out there for hours. And so there's all these little nuances. And also there's so much more variation in terms of what will work from one runner to another. And also what might be a trade-off for maybe being the best you can be in the shorter term, but it shortens your career, versus something that might last a bit longer. So being a bit smarter about not overdoing the mileage. Not to say there's a particular number that would be appropriate or a number of hours, but you've got to be more careful about adjusting that if you want to be in the sport for a long time.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, going back to Dave, one thing I found really interesting was him speaking about how his biggest training weeks were often on the weeks that he had his big race. He'd go, "Yeah, I don't often run over like 100 kilometer or 110 kilometers in a training week. But then you might put me at Leadville 100 and people go, hang on a second, like, how did you prepare for this with such low mileage?" And to your point, I mean, you can speak to this better than most people with Leadville. it makes sense. Like that time on feet, that fitness, you can go out and sure, you can try and smash yourself in the short term. I understand that for the sake of short term results. But I guess if you're looking at longevity, I assume is what you're saying. You want to be able to keep your body in a position to keep returning year after year. That's when you have to start to open the door a little bit to alternative modes of training, of aerobic fitness, or
To some degree, and just the volume in general. So your body doesn't know whether it did cycling or running. It just knows how tired it is and how damaged the muscles are. But again, thinking about specificity, if you want to get better at mountain running in a long ultra, most of what you're going to do is probably going to be mountain running. And also things like gym work, I would argue, become a bit less important for that kind of runner, except as they get older, because the fact that you're going up and down mountains, so you're getting leg strength, you're getting the pounding of the downhills, you're getting a much more even kind of core workout because of the fact that your balance is being engaged, your ankles are going to get stronger. So a lot of the things you might be trying to do in the gym, you get from being on hilly trails anyway. So it's not to say that strength work isn't important, but that trail running is a form of strength work, while road running much less so. So the types of things that tend to help the most, probably most obvious would be cross-country skiing or skimo. You see a lot of the European top-level mountain runners are skiers in the winter, often at a professional level, like Kilian Jornet being a perfect example. And then they're amazing mountain runners in the summer because there's such a big overlap there. The only thing that the skiing doesn't have is it doesn't really have the pounding impact of footstep after footstep because they're sliding the whole time. But they're going up and down mountains, they're doing huge vert, they're using their body and their cardio system in pretty much the same way, but maybe with enough variation there that also helps for their longevity. But yeah, so skiing is the most obvious. I know David Roche uses things like mountain biking. Quite a few runners do some degree of cycling, even at the pro level. Another one would be Jim Walmsley. He tends to seem to be on his bike quite a lot. But if you're trying to get the maximum volume you can, then doing something a little bit easier on the body is a way to do that. But most people listening, they're probably not maxing out the running they could do. They could probably get away with just spending a bit more time running or a bit more time hiking, and that's going to be more useful than doing, say, cycling or skiing, particularly because the trail running in the summer and the skiing is the winter, so you don't do them both at the same time. But I think most people don't realize that just doing the specific thing a little bit more, they probably have some gains to be made. So when David Roche does 100 kilometers a week, and quite a lot of the top pro guys who've lasted a long time, the Hal Kerners, the Karl Meltzers, people who are ultra runner of the year in the US like 10, 15 years ago. Did I say Scott Jurek? I can think of at least maybe 10 of the guys that lasted at least a decade. They weren't big high mileage guys, but bear in mind that if they're doing 100 and something kilometers a week or just over 100, it's in mountains, so it's a lot slower. So the number of hours there might be 12, 14, 15 hours, while if they're a road runner, the mileage would seem relatively low for being that good. But it does mean they can do it for more years. But yeah, I'm not sure how much some of those guys did cycling on top of the running. But most people, I would say, it's just a case of if you can do a little bit more, that will be worthwhile. But there's going to be a maximum that you can get to there. And the way you know that is, are you getting tired? Are you able to recover well? Do you still have enough bounce in your step to do good speed sessions? Or are you just kind of grinding it out and every day feels tiring and the muscles are sore, in which case doing less might be the thing that'll improve things, or maybe switching out some of the running for something with a little bit less pounding.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective, that the 100 kilometers that they're doing is probably going to be clocking up way more elevation than what like a middle distance runner was. Because I'd sort of been fascinated by that for a while. I was like, how is this converting to such incredible performances over such long distances? And maybe this is like a little blind spot of mine coming from the world of track and field um, that obviously, I mean, just the variables that you've spoken about already, it makes it obvious that we're participating in a completely different game. But that time on feet factor is one that I often overlook. I'll just look at it for distance, and maybe I'll schedule with the athletes that I'm working who are racing like a 10K on the road to be a little bit more specific with hills, or to focus on getting out and doing a specific style hill tempo. But for these athletes, they're kind of like you're more specifically living in the mountains and seeking that elevation more than probably. This is why it's so foreign to me. Probably any track and field runner that's on the planet right now. It's not as much of a key
just to put it in context, I think I saw something where they'd done a study of professional US marathoners, and over the course of a year, they averaged between about 10 and 14 hours a week of training. with that, I think that may have just been the running element. There may have been some strength work on top of that. I don't think it included really anything other than those two things, though. So 10 to 14 hours is a decent amount. And that might be for them, 140 miles a week for a top level male guy. So 250 odd kilometers a week. Well, if you do that amount of time in the mountains, it might be 110, 120 kilometers. And so it's a very different scenario, but it's also the same. Like if you're training someone who's a 30-minute 10K guy versus someone who's a 60-minute 10K runner, then for them to do that same distance, it's going to take them twice as long in their training because they're half the speed. So it's more the time that's relevant there. And that would change over time as their speeds go up. But in the mountains, you're still going to be going a lot slower than you would be on the road.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on, just to stick with Dave for a moment, because I'd heard him speak about it, and I'm just sort of picking your brain around what I've found fascinating. The speed factor seems to be something that he'll inject a lot of attention into. I'm not sure if that's something that like you're focused on with the athletes, because obviously when you get into a marathon or ultra marathon event, it's not uncommon to see the average athlete going out there just shuffling along, just being in this one motion movement because they've just been practicing it for so long. And the idea of sprinting seems like a foreign concept. You say sprint, they go, I sort of am. Like this is me at my fastest and at my slowest, but I can just do it for a long time. Is that something that you're focused on at all with the athletes you're working with, that high end speed, even
Well,
for the
it's still
ultras?
important, maybe not the high end speed. We're not trying to get them better in the 100 meters or something. So yes, we'd include strides, but we're not trying to make them a better sprinter because there's a big difference between sprinters and distance runners. And anyone listening can see this. Just look at the Olympics, the 100 and the 200 meter men and women, big and muscly. By the 400, they're starting to get thinner. By the 800, they don't look that different to a marathoner because it's all about endurance there. So particularly the 1500 meters through to 200 miles, it's the same physiology you need. It's about carb burning combined with fat burning. There's no, well, maybe they've got the sprint finish where there's a little bit of the sprinting element of it, but still the majority of what they need is the same as a really long distance runner going at a much lower intensity is needing. The demands on the body are the same. They're going to have higher mileage, while a sprinter is going to do hardly any mileage, but probably more strength work in the gym and 20 times 100 meters or something, but they're not accumulating a lot of actual running time. So when we put it in that context, whether you're training someone for 10K or I'm training someone for 200 miles, there's a massive overlap in the demands on the body. Other things come into it for the longer stuff. They've got to be able to eat. There's more variation in the terrain and the things they might have to train for. But the kind of physiology they need is still very similar. And all other things being equal, if you're a bit quicker at the 5K, the 10K, the marathon, that's going to help you going at these slower speeds because you've got a higher capability and therefore you'll be at a lower percentage of that to go at a certain speed or maybe to be able to run up a hill versus hike up a hill. So it's still the same ideas. And I would argue there's basically 4 types of run. Different coaches would use different terminology, but you've got speed sessions, long runs, hill work, and easy runs. Those words would change a bit, but I think universally everyone would recognize that if you're reading a marathon training book or if you're into ultras. So it's just the variations of how you do those and how much more might be biased on the hills if you're training for a mountain race versus a track race. But all of that is still very similar. So those core principles are really the same still.
Yeah, that actually leads nicely to a question that I was going to ask you, because one of the overwhelming factors, in my opinion, when you look at the world of ultras is just how many variables you're trying to navigate your way through. Like, not just to mention the training, but we're obviously talking footwear, talking hydration, we're talking fueling. But just with training in mind, like when you have a new athlete come to you and say, "Look, man, I'm preparing for a 50K or a 100K," or feel free to choose it when you answer this question. Um, and you got to sit down and go, "All right, like what's your history? What should training look like? What are you actually going through in terms of how much running versus how much cross training versus how much time on feet? Like, is there a process that you go through when you're trying to clarify what a program should look like for, I mean, feel free to choose the level of athlete that we refer to here, or is there a really big crossover between elite and even that community level ultra runner?
There's certainly the same principles, but it's going to depend on a lot of factors like what mileage have they done in the past, what racing experience they have. If they're doing their first 100 miler and the longest race they've done is a marathon, then that's a different scenario to someone doing a 100 miler who's trying to get quicker, who's been doing it for a decade already, because they've got more experience, their body has adapted to that more, they've got a better idea of what things work for them in training, what kind of issues held them back on race day. So a lot of it is really what is their lifestyle like, how much can they fit in, how much have they been fitting in? Because sometimes people come and they think, well, now I'm going to go all in and they want to double their mileage. And that's never a good idea to go, massive jumps in and changing what they're doing overnight, but you can do gradual changes over time. But the other mindset thing I try and talk to them about is we're not trying to do the most volume we can. We're trying to get the most adaptation and the most improvement in your fitness. And that's not always the same thing. If you're on 1 hour a week of running, yes, doing more is going to be the main thing you've got to do. If you're on 10 hours a week of running, then maybe going to 9 will make you a better runner. It's not necessarily that going to 11 is the best thing. So it really just depends on what their recent experience has been. And typically people are coming to me either because they're taking on something new, like a new distance, or something that's really difficult to get into because of lotteries like Western States or Hard Rock. And so because of that, they want to make sure they get their one chance at it and they do it as well as they can. And they don't want to have a bad race and then a decade later get another chance. So it's usually that they're wanting me to kind of just get further along that learning curve for them. And in many cases, it's trying to undo mistakes that they've made in the past and just help them to understand what has worked in their training and racing, and also what would be worth changing. And it's not just do more and then you'll magically be fitter. So a lot of it really isn't just the training. It's more the psychology of what will allow you to get more benefit out of running, what will allow you to race better. And one of the simplest things is often just start off slower on race day. I drill this home all the time because you'll see it in the 10K runners you have. I see it in every distance. We've all seen it. Every race you ever go to, people zoom off at the beginning. Doesn't matter if it's a 100-mile mountain race, they still zoom off at the beginning. So just holding yourself back from that, getting into the race with a bit of a warm-up, not overdoing the early sections of the race. Little changes like that can often make a world of difference. And to be honest, especially in the first year of working with someone, they're likely to get bigger gains from racing better than from being fitter, especially if they've been doing it a few years. I'm not going to double their fitness overnight, but I could double how well they can race for the fitness they have.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I relate to that so much. I often speak to people about the high school or the primary school is probably a better example of the stereotype of of
Mm-hmm.
what you just said. Your parents say, "Don't get caught up in the start." And you're like, "No, no worries," and then you absolutely just bolt that first 200 meters and die for the next 800
It's
meters.
really difficult to avoid. Even when I say to runners, like, okay, as they're doing 3, 2, 1, go, say in your head, just start off easy. Don't get worried by people zooming past. They still get a couple of miles in, and they tell me this after the race and go, I knew I was meant to start off slower, but it's only about an hour in that I realized I've been going too hard. So they still get drawn into it because they may be holding back a bit compared to what they normally do, but they've got this skewed perception of other people going even faster or other people running a hill they're trying to hike. And it makes them think they're going easy enough, even if it's still too hard. And so these, again, are the kind of tactical things that we'd be looking at with someone of what have they done in the past? What was the mindset as they were doing that? And how do we help them not just theoretically to do it in practice, but how do they actually do it and avoid these kind of little ego-related mind traps that they'll have that force them to do too much too soon?
Yeah. In terms of that, like the mind traps that you fall into, what would you say is that on race day? Because I understand sort of that race day anticipation and excitement, the fact that so many people fall into the trap of going fast naturally sways you along. Just last year I ran a half marathon. And I mean, I've been running for 25 years and it was the first half marathon I'd run in a long time. And I thought I was being cautious. And I remember, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but I remember my first K being a lot faster than I was anticipating it being, and it was lucky that I'd sort of been around for a little while, so I was like, all right, I'll back off a little for the next 2K and just sort of get myself back around roughly where I needed to be. It wasn't enough to absolutely destroy the race. It actually still turned out to be okay, but for someone who's new to the scene, like how do you avoid that trap of going, all right, I'm trying to keep up with these guys because I know I should be beating the person next to me.
Well, part of it is don't compare yourself to the other people around you, especially at the beginning. So don't worry what others are doing. Don't do their race, do your race. But also I try and get them to think, well, what was your mindset like the last time you start off too fast or every time you start off too fast? And they'll often be saying things like, well, someone ran past me or lots of people were going quicker than me, or I looked at my watch and that pace wasn't what I wanted it to be. So there's all these things that they're getting caught up in versus can you just get into a nice rhythm? And I'd rather they start off too easy than too hard. Because if you're a little bit too slow in that first couple of kilometers, even in a half marathon, you haven't lost much time. But if you go a little bit too hard, also, even if you take it down a notch, you might still go too hard. And then by about halfway, you really feel it. And this is a very difficult thing to do. I've done hundreds of races. I would say I'm one of the best pacers I know. I think I'm very good at it. The last race I did was on Thursday. It's Sunday today. And it was a 4.9 mile trail race. I still went off too hard in the first mile because it's anything that you're less familiar with, you're more likely to screw up. And those slightly shorter ones, in my head, it's just, oh, it's hard. But I did maybe, 2% too hard. By the second mile, I knew I had. There's only so much you can do. And also, that's almost halfway through the race at that point, and you've burnt yourself out a little bit. But it is genuinely difficult to do. But what I try and get them to do is just take the ego out of it. Don't worry that you're losing to that person, or you're going slower than you should, or you're further back in the field than you want. No one cares about the splits. And this is easier to do in an ultra because it's spread out more. But all they care about is how well did you do at the finish. No one cares if you were in last, and then you're middle of the pack at the end. Or, to be honest, I've had races where I'm quite a long way off the pace, at least in theory, say at halfway, and then win the race. In fact, of the 6 Leadvilles I've done, 4 of them were wins. I've never been in the lead at halfway. I've been relatively close, maybe second, third a couple of times, but never in the lead. And some of those wins, I won it by 2 hours. And so when you do that, it gives you the confidence to say, oh, the first half doesn't matter as much. I don't need to worry about being ahead of these people or gaining a few more minutes here and there. Instead, you can just say, okay, save myself for the whole race, try and spread out that effort the whole way. A phrase that I've heard, particularly in the US, is the idea of spreading peanut butter on a piece of bread. You don't want to dollop it all in the first bit, and then there's not enough to go over the whole piece of bread. And that's what going out too fast is. You're trying to judge how much do I spread for those early miles so that it'll last the whole way. And so you use previous races, you certainly use your recent training, whether it's speed session, long runs, everything else, to try and gauge that. And if you know that you keep tending, even with all of that, to go too fast, you say, okay, well, this is where I guess it is at this level, and I'm purposely going to go under what I think it should be, and then maybe that's the right level of effort that I'm putting in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. Those 4 wins that you had at Leadville, you said that, what was it, up until the halfway point, you weren't...
Never been in the lead at halfway, no.
Never in the lead at halfway. So it'd be an interesting mindset for someone like yourself, because going into those races, obviously you'd have the expectation that if things go well, like a win is a very realistic possibility. And so there'd be an element of, okay, obviously making sure that you're not placing all that peanut butter on one section of the bread, but also that the athletes who are your main competitors aren't developing an unmatchable or unattainable, uncatchable, what's the word?
Yeah,
Lead.
uncatchable, yeah. A
Yeah,
lead that unsurmountable or insurmountable lead.
That's what I was
Yeah,
looking for. That's
yeah.
exactly what I was looking for. And so, how do you balance those 2 factors? Because obviously, like there's a point between those that you have to sort of be cautious that someone doesn't measure themselves a little bit more effectively on that day, and just develop that insurmountable lead.
Well, what I would say is that you can only do your best race. And again,
Sure.
this is take your ego out of it. If an Olympian turns up and they're just way better than you, and even on a bad day, they're going to go quicker than you, or, this could be someone who's trying to do a 24-hour finish or whatever it may be, anywhere in the entire pack. If someone is fitter than you and has a higher capability, then don't let that skew what you do. Because one of the nice things about ultras is you can beat people who are faster than you by doing a better race than them, because more stuff can go wrong. But there's a very famous ultra runner from the 80s called Bruce Fordyce. So he was the 50-mile world record holder. He was a 100K world champion. He won Comrades, the massive ultra in South Africa, the double marathon. He won that 9 times in the 80s. And he was a 2:17 marathoner. So this is a fast guy. And he always would say that he would race his race, and he wouldn't be in the lead until very close to the end. And if someone beat him, if he's doing his best and he's judged it, and this person's ahead of him and stays ahead, then he'll shake his hand at the finish and go, well done, amazing race. But if he's, 5K from the end and that guy's 10 seconds ahead of him, he was going to give it absolutely everything. He wasn't giving it to this person. He wasn't saying to them, well, you go ahead and you go and win it. He was saying, I'm doing my best tactics. That'll get me deep into the race in one piece, and I'm going to bet that'll work. And it did. And so this would also terrify his competitors, that they'd feel they had to push harder to build up a bigger lead, knowing he'd finish strong. And they kind of were self-defeating, that they then tired themselves out too much. And it gave him a psychological edge to be a strong finisher and to not worry about what they're doing, because he just had to do his best race and he was probably going to be the fittest guy there. And if someone did beat him, he was willing to say, great race, well done. And so I always feel that's the best way to approach this. Do your race and get yourself deep into a race, even in a 10K, get to 8 kilometers in the best shape you can, not just jogging, but, and saving enough that you're not going to fade, that you've got a nice kick at the end, and then you're racing people. But you're not racing people at kilometer 1. You're not trying to beat them there. There's a subtle difference here for professional track racing, because if you have a 10,000 meter race or a 5,000 meter race, you'll have a bunch of people who are all the same speed. So there's tiny margins. They're going to be in a pack together. That is not the case in ultras. And also, you can have a bad patch 10 hours in, someone else has it 12 hours in. You don't need to be with them. You don't need to have some kind of peloton. And if you're off that, you have no chance. Instead, you've just got to do your best race, bet on yourself that your tactics will work, have the confidence for that. And there's 3 words I always use for this, which is confidence, discipline, and patience. So the idea is at the start line, have the confidence to know that if you pace it like this, it's okay if other people go and do their thing. The odds are they won't do it perfectly. So even if they're fitter than you can beat them. And then have the discipline and the patience to hold back, because ultras are very long and you've got to still have enough in the tank to actually be pushing hard near the end. So I never worried about people being ahead of me. I just planned on chasing people down and then betting that if I do my best race, I'd be up there with a chance. But if someone beats me, I know that I couldn't have gone any quicker. Because it's not that I'm jogging. It's not that I am not being mentally tough and giving it everything. I'm just trying to spread that peanut butter over the whole piece of bread. So when I'm at the end, I am pushing hard. And I've had much better runners than me actually say that if they knew I was behind them, they were running scared. And that feels good to me when I know, when it's people who, like, I've raced them in like a local 5K and they destroy me. They're much quicker. They are physically better runners. But if I can get the tactics right and they're more fatigued late into a race, just having them say to me occasionally, yeah, I was scared you were catching me. I knew that you'd finish hard. It gives you that extra confidence as well. And so that's what I try and instill in the people I coach. Be that strong finisher, because the odds are you'll do your quickest possible time. And it's much easier to race people if you're feeling a little bit better than them. If you're chasing people down versus people are passing you, much easier to stay positive and really be motivated at that point.
Yeah. And even in terms of just that approach to a race, you always leave a race with more confidence when you finish that last, say for the example of a 10K, that last 2K is stronger.
Mm-hmm.
You'll finish up and you go, okay, there might be a little bit more in the tank to play with next time. Where the flip side of that, when you do get caught in that early rush and you just battle out that last 4Ks and they were the slowest splits that you ran for the day, you go, oh my gosh, what's going on? So yeah, I always like that feeling of leaving, feeling as though, hey, there might have even been a little bit left in the tank. Maybe not if you
Well, it's
timed
not
it
even
perfect.
necessarily having something left. You're just having enough left for the latter stages, and then you're using it all up. But think of professional track races. The person leading most of the race is usually not the winner. So they could be leading for 24 out of 25 laps in a 10K and then lose the race and come 5th out of 8 because the rest of them are just biding their time, and then they have the race, and that other person maybe was pushing too hard to be in the lead. So it's tiny margins there, but it's exactly the same principle. Do your race, do it to the best of your ability. And the more you achieve that and you see it working in practice, the easier it is to have that confidence. And also the more it intimidates people you might be competing against if you're at the pointy end of the field.
Yeah, I don't know how much you follow the shorter distances, but the race that I have in mind as you speak about this is Jakob Ingebrigtsen in the Olympic 1500 meter final. Was it last year?
Last year, yeah.
Where he had Josh Kerr, Cole Hocker, there was like Yari Nagus. There was a number of athletes who were definitely faster finishers and also around about the same mark in terms of best time on paper. And so I was really interested to see how he would approach that race, because I think any track and field fan would know that, okay, if it was a sit and kick race, Josh Kerr was going to win. And so Ingebrigtsen's only chance, I thought, was probably to run a PB or run a world record, run the fastest time he'd ever run. And to do that, he kind of had to run from the front. And that idea of running scared, I felt like was a perfect description of maybe not running scared, but he was definitely running with the awareness that there was a couple of absolute finishers right on his tail. And it's
It's a
really
little bit
hard.
knowing your competitors matters there, but
Yeah.
also bear that in mind, all of their PBs are within a couple of seconds. So Jakob is the fastest, but the others are almost the same. And so if they're all together and some of them have a slightly stronger kick, then he can't win the race. And so that's why I think that particular distance at the moment in the men is absolutely fascinating. In fact, I'm going to be going to the Eugene Diamond League in a couple of months, and there'll be all of those Olympians battling it out, hopefully for the mile world record, because they don't have a 15, they have a mile there. But it's the same kind of idea that you've got to do your best race. And he was betting that if he paced from the front, he might just be able to run that kick out of their legs. But if he goes half a second too fast on one of the laps, it might run it out of his legs instead. So the margins are minuscule when you're going for Olympic goals like that. But it's the same kind of idea. And it's nice to go into it. If you know you're the fastest person, then you can say, okay, well, try and beat me, guys. And if you're the guy with the fastest kick, you're the one wanting it to be a slow race and saying, you're handing this to me if you're not far enough ahead at the end.
Yeah. It's really interesting to go back to your point as well. That last 400 meters would have been terrifying, I imagine, when he looked up at that scoreboard and realized, okay, hadn't quite done enough to run away from the competitors. And I guess I just use that example to sort of magnify the point that you're making, that it certainly is a really nice approach to be the person sitting on the tail and having that person in front of you scared if the win is what you're aiming for. The other thing I wanted to speak to you about, you mentioned it, that point of diminishing returns. I've always found this training philosophy fascinating, that I don't think it's unique to distance runners, because it seems I'm in the world of stand-up comedy here in Australia, and there's an obsession with a lot of top comics just to do more. And there's definitely not a direct correlation between the amount of gigs performed and how funny a particular person is. There's really a point where it's like, okay, well, there's obviously things missing in your, like, whether it's writing or whether it's editing or whether it's getting feedback on the jokes. There's a point where it's like, okay, this isn't doing. You just look tired now. You look a little bit off. But I would say in the world of comedy, in the world of running, they're probably the fields I know better than any other. There is this blindness to the other factors that you mentioned briefly just before, and a real focus on how much more can we get done until we break. I don't know what that is or why that is. Do you have any thoughts on what the obsession with our desire just to keep throwing more miles and hoping it
I
keeps
think it's
producing
people want
results?
to have something measurable to aim for.
Yeah,
With runners, it's a very easy one. Do more. Like,
yeah,
have higher mileage. That's such a comparable thing. With comedians, the thing they're trying to do is be the funniest, or maybe be the most successful, but those two should be linked, you'd have thought. But let's say it's to be the funniest, but doing more of it, does it make you funnier? Maybe in some, definitely to a certain point it will. You need lots of practice to nail that delivery and get it all perfect. But the same kind of thing with running is, at what point are you not getting fit? You're not getting as much adaptation, and that's the thing you're trying to maximize. But that's a much harder thing, like being the funniest you can be versus being the hardest working, or doing more gigs, or not turning down big paydays, or whatever it may be. But I think it's difficult to measure that thing that's a bit more intangible. So everyone will tend to pick the thing that is easier to measure. And doing more gigs is one. Doing more mileage is exactly the equivalent.
yeah. That's really good. So it's pretty much just the thing that we can tick off at the end of the week to say, hey, look how much I've done. It's almost a
Because then
psychological.
you're achieving that goal, even if that isn't actually the thing you're trying to measure. That gives you something you can definitely measure. Like, oh, I did 5 miles more than last week. That's better. When in fact, what you're trying to measure is, are you feeling fitter than you were? Are you getting more of a benefit from this training than you were previously? And that's a much harder thing to know for certain. And that's why I like people to do races, even including some short ones, even when they're a long distance racer, because that's the way you're going to learn. Is it paying off? A question I often get is, how do I know I'm getting fitter? And so I'll say to them, you're going to be doing the same speed session a bit quicker for the same effort. And you might see that in the heart rate. You'll see it in the paces, definitely. But one of the best ways is, can you race better than you did before? Because the thing we're really trying to measure is fitness in a race. Not, can you time trial a 5K better, but you're trying to do a 100-miler. That will help. But that isn't the thing, even if it's something you could measure frequently. It's, okay, well, have you got that gain in fitness in a way that you can get the benefit of it in a race? So that's going to be the training, the tactics, the mindset, the nutrition, all of those things. Can you get them to come together in a race? And so that is the ultimate test. Obviously, you can't do 100-milers every week or ultras all the time, but you can still get an idea along the way from how are your speed sessions going, how good do you feel doing that last climb on your long run. There's still things that are clear without having to look at a watch to tell you if it's better. It doesn't have to be some kind of algorithm on Strava saying that you've got fitter. You can see it in practice, and it should be obvious enough over time that there has been improvement, but it's much harder to still nail down and say, well, I'm 3% better, while you can say you've done 3% more miles.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Whether you're training for like comrades or you're training for the Leadville 100, like how do you measure that? Because obviously you've got, what is it? Comrades is an interesting example because it doesn't vary year to year. Like one year it's downhill a little, one year it's
Yeah,
up.
opposite. It changes direction. So there's a net downhill and a net uphill alternating.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how much that plays into the factor of how you're preparing, but is there much difference between the way that you're approaching those two events? I'm assuming I don't know as much around comrades, but I'm assuming it's not as there's not going to be as much altitude there as something like the Leadville 100.
No, well, Leadville's all at high altitude. So
Yeah.
if you don't get altitude training, you can get altitude sickness, and that can just derail the whole thing. Comrades is one end of it's at sea level, the other end is at, I think, about 600 meters. So again,
Oh, okay.
not high up. But
Sure.
that's a big net difference that if you're doing the uphill version, you've got 600 meters more climbing than descending and vice versa. So they're both hilly. Compared to a normal road marathon, they're a lot hillier per kilometer than you get. Even the down run has more uphill than you typically get per kilometer in a marathon. So they're both hilly races. They're not dead flat. But because of that subtle difference, if I'm doing the up run, I put way more focus on my uphills, knowing that my legs are going to be strong enough on the downhills, and that's not as big a portion of it. If I'm doing the down run, I've got more focus on just pure marathon fitness and long, non-stop downhills that I can do from like the ski resort that's just down the road from me and then coming back down. So it does change it even for that. And that's the same race on the same road, just with different direction, with what doesn't sound like a massive difference overall, but it is significant enough that it matters. I think it's about 2,000 meters of downhill and 1,400 meters of uphill, or vice versa. So again, lots of uphill in both cases, but it's enough of a change in the bias of how the training would work there for even the same event. Never mind changing that to Leadville, where it's trails, way more climbing in total per kilometer. All of it's at high altitude. The low point is just under 3,000 meters. So the whole thing is very, very high up. And that is, I mean, ultimately what you're looking for is what are your weakest links? So if that's a high altitude race, make sure you've done altitude training, which basically means going up to altitude. If it's a hot race, make sure you've done heat training. But what are the things that are likely to slow you down? That includes what we were talking about with pacing. No matter how fit you get, if you go off too fast, you're going to slow down. So the tactics and how we approach the race will matter there. And that's nothing to do with your fitness. That's just, can you do a better race for wherever you are on race day? And then the other specific elements that are about fitness and physical preparation. But that's kind of the fun thing about these races. Each of them's got a slightly different balance of all of these that you're trying to tune in and get it as good as possible for one race that might be a slightly different approach for a different race.
Yeah. So did you say the low point at Leadville was 3,000 meters?
Just under, yeah. So the Leadville town is 10,200 feet, which is just over 3,000. The high point is 12,600 feet. And so that's almost 4,000, but 3,700 or something. So it's all properly high up, like high enough up that it makes you ill if you don't do the altitude training. So the weakest links there are, can you be feeling fit enough and altitude adapted enough that you can then run at that without getting ill, but also without being too much slower than you would have been at sea level?
Yeah. I remember I went to Nepal in 2015. And when I was there, we flew from Kathmandu to Lukla. And then we hiked to a place called Namche Bazaar, which I think is like 3,500 meters.
I've
But then,
been there. I think that's actually 10,000 meters. That's about 3,000 meters at Namche Bazaar.
okay,
But it
so I
goes
wish,
up quite a bit higher towards Everest from there.
yeah, so I wish I could tell you exactly where we went. So from Namche was like a part of the first base for us. The next day we walked up to a village it was like 4,000 meters, and I remember the noticeable difference getting to that village and just seeing the locals walk around and how casual they were. Whereas me, like, it was a real, oh my gosh, like that mental side of what we were experiencing. It kind of tripped me out. We went all the way through to base camp, but I think by that time I had acclimatized and become accustomed and not so intimidated by the
But you
altitude.
still notice even a little bit of uphill, how much harder it'd be than doing that hill down at sea level.
Yeah,
And this is the thing about all extremes in races. When you get close to the edge of what the human body can manage, every tiny change makes it exponentially harder. So Western States 100 miler, for example, is a hot race. It's always hot, typically close to about 40 degrees as a high. So if you get one that's 41 degrees or 42 degrees Celsius, it's that much harder, even though it sounds like it's the same. And it's all hot. It's like, no, once you're at the edge, every little bit, your body's already at its limit. And if you push it a bit more, it can cause absolute carnage in the field, lots of people dropping out, blowing up, absolute destruction. And the same thing with altitude. So you can have something where someone's got used to high altitude, but then even having another 300 meters of climbing, that's enough that kind of breaks them or makes them feel ill because the body's already being worked so hard to get there.
it's
But that's the
fascinating.
fun. That's my whole point, that there's all these little variables. You're trying to work out how you can survive them or stop them being something that causes catastrophic failure in a race.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't want to keep making this about comedy, but it is funny the correlation between the two things. Like whenever I drive home from a gig, whether it's good or bad, I go like, what was it? The crowd? Was it the joke? Was it the timing? Was it my mood? Was it my energy level? Was it because you can take the same jokes in two different places. One can kill and one can bomb, and you go, what
Mhm.
was that? What just happened? And it does your head in, but it also is the thing that just keeps you coming back. And the way you speak about the ultra running, it's just it's amazing how many crossover points there seems to be with an event like Leadville. How are you training for that? So obviously, like, because Ben's not
Ben's not
altitude.
high up. We're just over. I live at about 1,100 meters, 3,600 feet.
Oh, okay, so still
So
still okay.
it's not enough to even really create any altitude adaptation. It's enough that I'm next to stuff that's high up. I can go up to the mountains nearby, go up to 10,000 feet, so 3,000 meters. So I can get up there, but that's just briefly. It's not really altitude training to go up there. It's just hill training. But the people who live in Colorado, they basically get that the whole time. So a lot of the marathon bases where pro marathoners are, like Boulder and Flagstaff, they're the kind of place that are a little bit higher up where they're getting a bit of altitude adaptation as well. But they'll often come down a bit lower to do their speed work to get the
Yeah,
real quality in.
yeah. And so, will you move to a place like that if you're preparing for Leadville 100 for 6 months or so, or
No, just for a couple of weeks before.
that's it?
Yeah, because the again, it's knowing how the body adapts. So for heat training, you can just do a stimulus of say 30 to 60 minutes a day for 5 days a week for 2 or 3 weeks, and you get pretty much maxed out on how well your body is adapted to heat. So there's no need to be in a really hot place and just be hot all day long. Altitude is more about being in the altitude 24 hours a day. But within about 3-4 weeks, you've got the absolute maximum you're going to get in terms of what you can personally do. After that, it would be so incremental, it's almost worthless. But generationally, like people in Nepal, when they've lived there one generation after another, there will be genetic adaptations passed down because survival of the fittest, the ones who cope with the altitude better are the ones that are more likely to have kids. But for you and me, if we go up to that, it's a very short amount of time that you can pretty much max it out. And then there's downsides as well to being up to these places. If I go up to Leadville for a month before the race, I can't train hard because it's too high up. So I only want to be there kind of nearer the end, just overlapping with a taper. And same kind of thing with heat training. You don't want to be heat training necessarily all year round, particularly not really hardcore heat training that's very tiring. Otherwise, you can't train hard at the same time. So again, it's trying to work out what works for you from your past experience, combined with the sports science, and then making sure you're not going to just exhaust yourself for race day on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had something in mind that I wanted to throw at you just then. I've completely. Oh, okay. I'd been thinking for a little while. I wanted to talk to you. Obviously, the training cycle is one huge variable. The recovery cycle, being able to get out there and actually make sure that you can put in this work consistently, is something that I think it's become a real theme. I've noticed over the last few years of doing this podcast. I feel like the topic of recovery has become a lot more, even to like a community level runner, a lot more of a focus point. Or maybe it's just my own eyes have been open to it. Now I'm more aware of it. But when it comes to the recovery between sessions, are there some real standout focus points that you have? Obviously, the fundamentals, I'm assuming sleep and nutrition and things are huge. But if you were to speak at the foundations of recovery, like where do you start with that?
I'd say keep it simple is the number one thing. And again, use your experience. If you know that you can get by on 6 hours, or not get by, you can feel good on 6 hours a night of sleep, then maybe doing a bit more than that isn't going to make as much of a difference. I personally need about 9 hours a night to be training hard. And I feel it if I get much less than that. While I have friends who can go way less sleep than that, and it's absolutely fine. So if you've had a one size fits all of you must get your 8 hours a night, that wouldn't necessarily work for people. It might be too much for some and not enough for others. So you've definitely got to use experience there. But also, it's just knowing that most of the stuff out there for recovery is bullshit. It's not actually going to help you at all. The main things are: can you sleep well? Can you be aware of stresses in your life and anything physically or mentally causing stress, and have some degree of lessening that, especially if you're training hard. Eating, obviously having good diet, and there's no perfect diet, but just trying to make sure you get the nutrients you need and enough calories. If you get those core things right, and then you're aware of how your body is feeling and adjust your training accordingly, and this is again what a coach is doing, but my job as a coach is helping the runner to get better at doing it, because I can't micromanage the middle of their run and say, well, now call me up if you need to slow down, or call me up if you need to stop it there. I'm trying to teach them to be able to do that themselves. So then they're doing it day in, day out, and they can do it well in the race as well. But so much of it is body awareness. It's being aware of what are the cause and effects of, oh, you did that speed session too hard. How did that feel? How sore were your legs 3 days later? That's a bit too much. Let's take it down a notch for next time. And rather than it being heart rate or other metrics that tech can measure, like HRV or resting heart rate or who knows what else there could be, various things. I'm trying to get them to think about how do they feel and how does it feel during the run? Can they correct it if they realize something is unsustainable or too hard? And then how's that feeling afterwards? And keep learning through that process. But that's the only way anyone can do it. So there's no hard and fast rule, like you need this amount of sleep and that's the number. And if you get that, then you'll recover from anything. It's still going to matter how hard is the training, how is your body responding to that training. And people will obviously compare to what others are doing, particularly with mileage, and thinking, well, if my competitor's doing X miles a week, I've got to do at least that to compete with them. Not necessarily the case. And also that person may not be optimizing. Instead, you want to be seeing how your body's responding to it. Again, it's that idea of, can you think about optimizing your adaptation, not any other metric? We're not trying to get the best heart rate variability numbers. We're not trying to get the best sleep numbers. We're not trying to get the best mileage numbers. We're trying to look at it in its entirety and go, how much adaptation have you got? How fit are you? And the biggest test of that would be within a race, obviously.
Yeah, I like that you called so much of the recovery stuff out there bullshit at the moment, because there's a big freeing element of that. You can get so bogged down in the minute details that you can almost do nothing. You sort of freeze in one place because you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even really know how to measure HRV. What's the point of even focusing on how much I'm sleeping then, or whatever it might be? But if you get those core tenets of recovery in place, you're going to be a huge step ahead of not only where you would be otherwise, but where so many of your competitors are.
But just to add one thing there, it's kind of like a car. You can know how much horsepower it is, how big the engine is, how much it weighs. But if all you're caring about is how fast it goes around a track, that's the bit that matters. So, oh, great, you've increased the horsepower, but is it now heavier and it's slower? What we care about is the performance element of it, or the fitness element, let's say. It doesn't have to be a race. It could just be coming through and feeling fitter. But that's what we're trying to care about. And yet people get bogged down in, well, here's something I can measure, so I'll try and maximize my sleep number from this app or something, when actually then they might stress out about their sleep, make it worse, and it's not even helping them with the bit that does matter. But also it's not going to be the whole picture. Even if that thing is correlated, it may not be the only thing that matters, and they might forget about the other stuff because they're getting distracted.
It's such a good point. Would you put anything else in that same category of, I think what I really like about conversations like this is just taking the individual as like that central focus point. It's not, hey, 8 hours of sleep is the number you need to get, or 100 grams of protein is the number you need to get. It's the, okay, hey, what do you feel you respond to? What have you noticed? Like, when do you feel good? When do you feel rubbish? Just being aware. And the thing with this is, like, distance running seems to have a reputation rewarding those who can just be around for a long time. And I think part of that is exactly what you just said, like that there's no better gauge of what works for you than stuffing it up, or like trialing
You learn by
something.
doing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And the only way to really figure that out is through showing up daily and paying attention to, hey, that worked well, and that was rubbish. Whereas I think a lot of people, and maybe, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the bullshit factor of so many of the recovery strategies out there now are false promises that it's going to bring you to where you'd like to be, like in a week rather than 12 months.
Well, that's the thing I was going to say. The main thing here is consistency. So the people who get fitter, because they've been able to keep running, or whatever sport it is, for a longer period of time, to accumulate more fitness, more experience, and that's what gets them to the next level. So I'll often see someone comes to me and they're quite young and they're good at running. They're like, oh, I want to be winning Western States soon. It's like, yeah, but I know you saw that guy who their first ultra, they won a qualifier and got a golden ticket, and their second ultra, they won Western States. But that isn't a new runner. This isn't someone who started last year. They've done 10 years of collegiate level 5,000 meters. They've done 100 miles a week for a decade. And they've just started doing ultras, and they happen to be, able to put all that fitness together quickly. But it's not an overnight thing. It does take a long time, and that consistency matters more than anything else. In anything, in comedy as well, no one's going to do their first stand-up and just absolutely nail it, because they've got to learn things. They've got to be able to react to the audience better and things like that. But I think it's that individual element and the fact that it does take time that can be difficult for people to appreciate, because they don't always see all the hard work that's going into it. They just see the result of someone winning a big race and then they think, oh, they've just appeared now, when in fact they'll have been at it for a long time to get to that point.
Yeah, look how easy that was.
Exactly.
Such a
Yeah.
good point. Man, I told you around 45 minutes. We've gone a little bit over, so I'm not gonna take up too much of your evening. But I'm really excited. I was looking forward to it. I said to you before I hit record that you got some cool looking books on your shelf. I can see a couple that I have that do hard things, Atomic Habits. Any others that you recommend that we should check out related to anything that, or not related to
Yeah,
anything that we
I would say in
yeah.
particular, The Law of Running. It's an old one, but Tim Noakes, and again, that's related to South Africa and comrades. But that got so many of the fundamental principles. There's a couple of things that are a bit out of date in that now. But overall, if you just want one book that gives you some good overarching principles for distance running and particularly ultras, that's got some very useful stuff in there.
Awesome, man. And obviously, you're based in Bend. You're working with athletes from all over the world. Are you working online and stuff with athletes who are interested?
Yes, it's online. I have people all over the world. I actually have 2 people in Australia, 2 people in Sydney at the moment that I'm
Oh,
coaching. But typically it's like North America, mainly in Europe. But there's also a team of coaches that work for me. And so
yeah.
we help people all over the world because it's all remote based stuff because people have GPS watches. We've got all of that going into the training plans. We've got video calls. We've got emails. So the old style coach with the stopwatch by the side of the track, I don't think anyone does that anymore. That, there's a lot more data you can get without the coach physically being there. Plus, the thing I'm trying to teach people is not just, oh, that 400 meters was 62 seconds. We'll do this one in 61. I'm trying to make them think about it and how does it feel and be able to do it themselves rather than me just telling them exactly what to do, because that's the skills that they need for racing. Like, do I speed up here? Do I slow down? Do I need to look after myself better? How do I problem solve? So if they're not doing that every day, then they're not going to do it on race day. So they can't just be listening to me and just thoughtlessly doing things. It's helping them to actually think through it and learn how they're doing it along the way.
Yeah. All right. Well, for everyone who's interested, I'll make sure I've linked your website in the description to this episode. But man, thanks so much for making the time to come on. That was a heap of fun.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Ty.